After a decade of combing through ISO 13485, I've learned one game-changing tip that makes everything click. And no, it's not another boring checklist or a deep dive into the clauses even. It's about shifting your perspective, the lenses by which you look at ISO 13485. And if you can see ISO 13485 as a system of interconnected plan, do, check, act, PDCA cycles, you'll unlock a whole new way to understand and implement it. So if you're a beginner or you've struggled to understand ISO 13485 in a way that you think is mature, stick with me and I'll show you how this one insight changes everything. If it's your first time tuning in, welcome to Let's Combinate. I'm your host, Subhi Saadeh, and I've been working with ISO 13485 now for more than 10 years. And I've owned an ISO 13485 site quality manual for over 3 years. I had to defend it and present it in many audits. I led management reviews. I've done a bunch of audits against ISO 13485 as an auditor. And I've had to help manage quality management systems in general for some of the top organizations in medical devices and combination products, pharma. So if you enjoy this video and want to support the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps out, and like the video. And with that, let's jump in. I think ISO 13485 is really no exception. When you shift your perspective and you can see it as a step-by-step framework for implementing your quality management system, or QMS, everything about ISO 13485 starts to make sense, and make sense in a different way. Now, ISO 13485 is the backbone of quality management for medical devices, but many people don't realize it's not just a rule book, it's a guide. And Wayne Dyer, a renowned author and speaker, said, if you change the way that you look at things, the things that you look at change. And from the same vein, Anais Nin, the essayist, noted, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. I wanted to talk about the way ISO 13485 is structured. I think this is really helpful in understanding it in a way that's different than regulations. And standards in general are not really mandatory documents. They're frameworks that are set up as a baseline, think floor, not ceiling. And so in certain regions, and I'll probably do another episode on this, in certain regions it is required, and in other regions it's helpful to be, like when you talk about MDSAP and stuff like that. But the way that regulations are written, they're like an extension of legislation, and there's a specific framework for that. And the way that standards are written, in many cases, they're written in the way that they're supposed to be implemented. So if you just look at how ISO 13485 is set up, and you look at the fact that Clause 4 is quality management system, Clause 5 is management responsibility, Clause 6 is resource management, Clause 7 is product realization, and Clause 8 is measurement, analysis, and improvement, the structure of ISO 13485 is deliberate. If you look at it as a contrast to, say, 21 CFR 820, and you try and contrast it, you realize that the key difference is that regulations like 820 tell you what you must do. You must have a complaint handling system. But ISO 13485 goes a little further in that it guides you through the process. Define, document, implement, and monitor your complaint handling. So ISO 13485 doesn't just stop at compliance, it helps you create a process that works in real life. And so ISO 13485 doesn't just stop at compliance, it helps you create a process that works in real life. Now, let's go back. Now let's talk about the plan, do, check, act cycle, or PDCA. It's a cornerstone of quality management. PDCA traces its roots back to the 1930s with Walter Schuhart, a statistician who introduced the idea of iterative process control to improve quality. Later, Deming refined and popularized PDCA in the 1950s, particularly in Japan, where it became critical for rebuilding industries post-World War II. And PDCA works as a very simple, repeatable framework for continuous improvement. First, you plan by identifying objectives and designing processes to meet them. Next, in the do phase, you implement that plan. Then you check by analyzing the results and comparing them to your objectives. And finally, in the act phase, you standardize the changes or adjust and try again. This cycle is the backbone of ISO 13485, and it it drives improvement by ensuring that every step is deliberate, that every step is monitored, and that every step is refined. Now, so each clause of ISO 13485 maps to one or more stages of PDCA and is captured within that continuous improvement sort of PDCA loop. And let's look at ISO 13485 as a whole. The plan, you develop a QMS that meets regulatory requirements for medical devices. You do by implementing the QMS across the organization. You check by conducting internal audits and management reviews to assess the effectiveness. And then you act by addressing nonconformities, improving processes, and updating the QMS as needed. Another example, let's dive into Clause 4, Quality Management System. You plan by establishing a documented QMS with defined processes and controls. You do by implementing the processes and ensuring that documentation is maintained. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen, as I'm sure you've heard in many audit trainings. You check by monitoring the QMS performance through internal audits and doc control reviews, and you act by updating procedures and processes based on audit findings or management review. Another one, management responsibility. You plan by defining quality objectives and ensuring alignment with the organization's strategic goals. You do by communicating those objectives and providing resource management for implementation. You check by reviewing performance against the objectives in management review meetings. Typically, this is done at least annually. And you act by adjusting the objectives and allocating resources as needed. Let's go through another one, design and development. This one's really easy. You plan by creating a design and development plan, which is actually a section of ISO 13485. You create a risk management plan, maybe. You create a validation plan and all the planning documents that you need. You do by creating and defining design inputs and establishing design outputs, think prints and drawings, specifications. You check by doing design verification and design validation, and you review the design outputs against the inputs, and you make sure that the user needs are validated, and you act by modifying the design or process based on the review findings, or you act by launching the product. You can do this with any section of the standard. And so the point of that, of me going through all the different sections, is just to illustrate that you can find PDCA cycles all through, zoom out of ISO 13485 and look at it as one big PDCA, or you go into one section of it and you look at it as a PDCA, or sometimes you can go into clauses and see, individual clause may have, elements or all the elements of PDCA. And I think that this matters because looking at ISO 13485 as an implementation focused approach is really helpful for beginners. It helps break down the complexity of ISO 13485 into manageable steps. You look at it in a way that's active. Where are cycle here? What am I looking for? It fosters a continuous improvement mindset because you're looking at, okay, section, how are they planning? How are they doing? How are they checking? How are they acting? It connects it into the real world application. So instead of looking at it like, oh, I must have criteria for supplier selection, you start to think, how is my company, or how is this company that I'm evaluating as an auditor or that I'm training on their SOP, how do they plan their supplier management? It naturally aligns with regulations, obviously making compliance easier. It goes to the heart of it, which is, what is the point of a QMS? To ensure consistent delivery of safe, effective products and making sure that your QMS has the ability to identify and fix issues. And so to summarize, ISO 13485 isn't just another checklist. It's a roadmap for building a robust quality system that evolves with your organization. By understanding its structure and that PDCA is the backbone and how it's written for implementation, you'll not only comply with the regulations, but you'll also create a system that truly works. And so if you love this content, please do subscribe to the channel. To hear from you, and comment and like below, and take care. Combination.